Wonderful to see you all here in Ann Arbor, in the Dana Building at the School for Environment and Sustainability, and online. My name is Andy White, and I'm a professor of practice here at SEAS, and we're really excited about today. And I'm here with my colleague, Professor Kyle White, also of SEAS. We have an exciting agenda ahead today and an ambitious agenda. We're thrilled to have leaders from around the world, from Indigenous peoples organizations, local community organizations, Afro-descendant organizations, representatives of the youth movements of all those different peoples online. And we want to hear them speak about what they fought for in Belém at the COP, what they achieved, and what they think is next, what they plan to do next, and what they think all of us should be aware of. So please get seated, and we'll get started. I'd like to welcome you all again on behalf of SEAS, and also on behalf of our two other collaborating organizations. One is the Rights and Resources Initiative, represented by Dr. Solange Bandiaky-Badji, who you'll hear from in just a few minutes, and also PACT. PACT is the Pathways Alliance for Change and Transformation. It's a new coalition, a strategic coalition of Indigenous research organizations from around the world, and we're just honored to host the Secretariat of PACT here in SEAS. So before I hand over to Kyle, I want to mention just a few instructions, kind of ground rules for today. One is there is interpretation. Our colleagues at Interpreting Columbia are online, so all of you online on Zoom, you can choose on the interpretation icon, you can choose the language you want to hear in. We have speakers who will be speaking in Portuguese as well as Spanish, perhaps French as well. All those languages are options. And here in the room, you'll be hearing English. Hope that's okay with everyone. And so that's first things first is get ready for your translation. And if you have any questions, of course, ask via chat, and we have a great technical team that'll help sort it out. Secondly, the day is divided in two parts. The first part is an hour, and will be filmed, and we'll have to be pretty strict. And it will basically have speeches from the leaders, and Kyle will coordinate that. And then we'll have an intermission. And then the second part will be discussion, about an hour and a half. So please be thinking about your questions for the speakers. On Zoom, post your questions in the chat, and they'll be collected and given to us during the intermission. We'll review them. In the room, we'll take your questions live during that session again. So please be thinking about your questions for the speakers. And I think that's it right now. Kyle, did I miss anything? No? Okay. Well, Kyle, please take it away. And thank you again, and welcome to all of you.
Great. Thank you very much, Andy, and welcome to everybody. Again, I'm Kyle White. I'm an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and I'm also a professor here at the SEAS, the University of Michigan. And I'm so thrilled for us to be all here together and to really be honoring years of advocacy from Indigenous people, from local communities, from Afro-descendant peoples. And the reason why I really wanted to call this event Making History, from my perspective, goes back to early parts in my career as a tribal member climate advocate. And as many of you know, the Conference of Parties for Climate Change is one of the major decision-making bodies internationally for climate action. And in 1998, one of the things that I remember most powerfully in my experience as an early career advocate and organizer was there was a conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Over 100 indigenous persons, primarily from tribal nations in the U.S., gathered. It was called Native Peoples, Native Homelands. And one of the things that came out of that gathering was the Albuquerque Declaration. And the Albuquerque Declaration was actually sent with the United States delegation to the fourth Conference of Parties, which was in Buenos Aires at the time, and it was read at that conference. And when I reflect about the things that were stated in that declaration, and you all should look it up and see what it says from now almost 3 decades ago, had I known then that that was going to be a drop of water in this wave that we're now seeing crash very powerfully after the 30th Conference of Parties, it's making history. And just consider, some of these things. When we talk about so many of our communities, it's 2 billion people that for decades have been completely marginalized and excluded from meaningful involvement in environmental decisions. But now, coming back, asserting leadership and demonstrating genuine accomplishment and leadership. So coming out of the 30th Conference of Parties, the Intergovernmental Land Tenure Commitment. 160 million hectares pledged by 36 governments led by Brazil, Peru, and Norway to be legally recognized for indigenous peoples, local communities, and Afro-descendant peoples. The Forest and Land Tenure Pledge, the biggest pledge coming out of a Conference of Parties, $1.8 billion to support the climate action of indigenous people, local communities, and Afro-descendant peoples. And again, larger and more significant. And this is a commitment from the Forest Tenure Funders Group, which is 35 governments and philanthropies. One of the outcomes personally, as somebody that has fought for tribal nations for almost 3 decades in the climate space, the People's Pledge from the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities. This is an incredible assertion of sovereignty, as I would call it, is that indigenous people, local communities, and Afro-descendant peoples, through the People's Pledge themselves, are pledging $500 million, their own resources, to support direct financing of land-based, community-based, culturally-based, customary, wisdom-based, knowledge-based land stewardship practices that support climate action, which seeks to completely curb this trend, the People Pledge funds, but we find out that only a fraction of those funds go to the communities that they are intended for. This to me, again, is major in making history. And coming out of COP30 as well, in the Just Transition Work Plan, people fought for respect for indigenous peoples' rights to land, self-determination, free, prior, and informed consent, and the acknowledgement in that plan of the rights and protections of indigenous people in voluntary isolation. And again, these are key interventions in this text. And so it is making history from my perspective, and I'm so thrilled that we have a chance to hear directly from the people who have worked hard for so many years to make these changes happen, and they can speak to their own perspective and knowledge and to the specific people and communities and groups that they represent themselves, to talk about how they interpret what they fought for, what they achieved. But most critically, this is an event where they get to provide to all of us and the world the instructions that all of us need to know for how we can take meaningful climate action together that is precisely in the spirit of the communities that these pledges and commitments are intended to directly serve. And so I'm so thrilled to announce who our speakers are, the leaders that are here with us and sharing. I'm going to introduce them first, and then after I've introduced all of the speakers just by name and title and organization, we can have an applause after that. But the first is Rukka Sombolinggi, Secretary General of the Indigenous Peoples Alliance of the Archipelago, Indonesia, Amman, and also co-chair of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities. Secretary General Rukka and Amman is a member of PACT, the Pathways Alliance for Change and Transformation. Kimaren Ole Riamet, who is the Executive Director of the Indigenous Livelihood Enhancement Partners, Kenya. And Executive Director Kimaren is also a member of PACT. Gustavo Sánchez Valle, President, the Network of Community Forest Organizations of Mexico, and the Executive Committee of the Mesoamerican Alliance of Peoples and Forests. Bharati Pathak is a member of Parliament, Nepal, and part of the Women's Rights and Resources Network. Kátia Penha, National Coordinator of the National Coordination of Articulation of Rural Black Quilombola Communities, and also a representative of the International Coalition of Afro-Descendant Peoples for Climate Action. I'm thrilled that we have youth leaders with us. Kania Parkiri of the Indigenous Peoples Livelihood Enhancement Partners, Kenya. Sharana Sherpa of the Center for Indigenous Peoples Research and Development, Nepal. And Saba Rani Maharjan of the Global Youth Network. We also have leaders from important supporting networks. Juan Carlos Jintiach, Arcos, Executive Secretary of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities, Ecuador, and our co-sponsor, Solange Bandiaky-Badji, who is the coordinator of the Rights and Resources Initiative and the president of the Rights and Resources Group. Let's have an applause for these tremendous colleagues. Everybody who's been involved for their careers in accomplishing this important and historic work. And so before we hear from the leaders, I wanted to first invite Dr. Solange, our co-sponsor, to share some words with us about this partnership together that has gone into planning this event. Solange?
Yes, thank you very much, Andy and Kyle, for the introductions. I am very excited to start the new year strong by joining such a timely and important event co-hosted by SEAS, PACT, and RRI. My name is Solange, and I'm the president and coordinator of RRI. RRI is a global solidarity network of over 200 organizations dedicated to advancing the forest, land, and resource right of indigenous peoples, local communities, Afro-descendant peoples, and the women and youth within this group. And the RRI coalition members, and most of them are part of this webinar, capitalize on each other's strengths, expertise, and geographic reach to amplify the voices of the locals and support the realization of their rights. And I must say that for those who don't know, Andy White is a co-founder of RRI. Andy founded RRI. And also there are many other institutions that Andy has been part of the founding, which is the Penha facility, the Community Land Right and Conservation Initiative, Clarify. And these are part of the leading institutions in the sector right now. So I just wanted to commend Andy's vision for helping all of us really come together by setting up all these new institutions and also allowing us to work with our indigenous and local community and Afro-descendant partners who also have their own funding mechanism. And we're seeing a really new sector that RRI, Andy, and others have contributing to setting up. And this year also, I'm very excited, before giving you back the floor, to collaborate with PACT. And PACT is a strategic alliance of leading indigenous and local community research organizations in the global north and south. We know that over the past decades, less than 1% of global climate funding has gone to supporting indigenous and local communities' forest management. This is even more pronounced for indigenous and community youth, whose ideas and knowledge remain severely underfunded. So this is a gap that both PACT and RRI are trying to fill. So by collaborating with PACT, RRI, this will help fill this gap, and it will help also mobilize more funding and support for indigenous and local community youth, and create more opportunities for our leaders of tomorrow together. So thank you again, Kyle and Andy, and I'll give you back the floor, and it's going to be an amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Solange. I'd like to move now to hear from our speakers for our opening session. And we've asked the speakers in whatever way they would like to speak to what they fought for, what they achieved, but most importantly, what do they want from all of us moving forward in order to meet the moment? What are the actions that we can do together that will make this moment different? What are those good instructions? And before I move to our first speaker, which is Secretary General Rukka, I just wanted to mention a couple of more minor instructions. The first is that we have asked that the speakers do their best for this session to speak for just 7 minutes, given how many speakers we have. But we all here know how to be flexible and adaptable, but we have asked for these short statements at the beginning. But we do have time in the second session for extended discussion so that we can hear everything. And for those of you who are here, there'll be a chance to ask questions in that second session. If you are on Zoom, please, during the intermission, enter your question in then, and that we can start tracking the questions during the intermission. And I also just wanted to mention that this is a deeply hybrid event with many things happening. And so far, it's been going fantastic, but we'll all work together in case various communications or other issues come up. So just to note that our colleagues in the Seeds Communications Office have worked very hard, their colleagues at Michigan Media, as well as the translators provided by the Rights and Resources Initiative, and just want to mention that we're in that environment, but we're going to do amazing work together today. So looking forward to it. And then after each speaker gives their statement, we'll have an applause, and then I will announce the next speaker. So to begin with, for our first speaker, and thinking about what did you fight for, what did you achieve, and what's next for the path forward, I'd like to invite to the floor Secretary General Rukka Sombolinggi. Rukka.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Kuresumanga, thank you very much. Bongi Melo, good evening from Indonesia to all friends, relatives, sisters, and brothers. I would like to thank the Andy and Kyle for the leadership of PACT and making this event, these discussions happening today. Thank you very much. I think Kyle has already stole my first point on the just transitions. And it's truly amazing that we together, while in Belang, I didn't get the chance to stay until the last day, but our friends, indigenous advocates and leaders were there to fight for it. We know it's always our reality that nothing on silver plate for us. So anything that happens, including that particular reference under the program of work of just transitions, is because we really worked hard together, indigenous peoples globally. That is really a collective work together. What is also very important and critical to point out in that one provision is that it didn't mention the reference to national law, because that's always have been what the government trying to water down all the provisions for protections and recognitions of indigenous peoples. Is they will always say subject to national law, which nothing in these provisions, meaning that all the international human rights standard norms applies. I think that is very important to recognize and to acknowledge. And beside all these disappointments, we are disappointed in general with the COP30 because of the result is not as what we wish for. But we also congratulate everybody who worked hard for that provisions under the program of work of just transitions. It is very clear reference to self-determination, to FPIC, and also to our sisters and brothers, indigenous peoples in voluntary isolations and initial contact. That's very important. The second one is from the perspective, and Solange mentioned earlier about the direct finance, the funding for indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant, and local communities, that again, they renewed their commitments, and now we have 1.8 billion US dollar. We, of course, need, this is very small, but what needs to be done is we need to make sure that this funding is really reaching to indigenous peoples, local community, and Afro-descendant. And in the future, we will work on how to work with the intermediary. Yeah. And last but not least, from indigenous people's perspective from Indonesia, since 2016, after the historical National Constitutional Court ruling that customary forests belong to us, to indigenous peoples, until today, the government of Indonesia only returned 370 hectares of our land in the form of customary forests, indigenous forests. But in Beleng, they announced, they committed to return 1.4 million hectares indigenous forest. And we've been working on that. When we came back from Beleng, we immediately go and work with the government. And today we already have the roadmap of these 1.4 million hectares. I think the lesson learned is, as indigenous peoples, we need to make sure that all the momentums, all the space that we have, that have been fought for nearly centuries, yeah, for more than a century, actually, from since Descartes went to League of Nations. This is something that we have to remember, that the space that we have now is because of we fought for it, we worked very hard for it, and that's why we need to make sure that we take the change. We make sure that we make use of every change to push our government to recognize and protect our rights as indigenous peoples. I think that's from me, Kyle. Hopefully, I don't go over the 7 minutes. And I would like to again thank you to everybody for this. And I will be here, standby, and ready to have conversations with all of you. And thank you also to RRI and everybody who have supported this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the Secretary General for sharing your message with us. I'd like to move on to our next speaker. I do believe that I'm going to briefly change the order just due to some technical connectivity. So President Gustavo is the person who I'm going to ask to speak next, but just giving a moment for that transition. Again, appreciate everybody being here and everybody showing their energy for this critical cause. So for our next speaker, I'd like to invite to share President Gustavo Sánchez Valle. Gustavo.
Gracias, Kyle.
Thank you, Kyle.
Bueno, voy a hablar yo en español.
I will be speaking in Spanish. And I would like to say that the organization that I represent is a network of local organizations of community forests made up basically by indigenous groups and local community groups. Before I dive fully into these matters, I would like to begin by thanking Kyle and Andy and RRI. And I would like to greet my fellow speakers, Solange, Rukka, Kátia, Bharati, amongst others. And of course, I would also like to greet all those who are joining us both in person and virtually. We will talk about the agenda which we promoted during COP30. First, we talked about the recognition of the rights of local communities. And as I pointed out a while back, the network that I represent is a mixed network, which includes both indigenous peoples and local communities. And I would like to say that we're also part of the Mesoamerican Alliance of Peoples and Forests, which is also a platform that is made up of indigenous peoples and local communities. And also, it is part of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities. For many, the term local communities is not that well known. So I would like to start off by pointing out that this is a term that started to be used with the creation of the Environment Conventions of the UN. This was back in 1992 to recognize the importance and the existence of groups that hold certain characteristics that do not belong to indigenous peoples. The organizations that represent these local communities have warned that there is a gap in this recognition and in the representation within multilateral bodies. And we have set out to build in a collective manner and for several years a series of criteria, 4 in fact, for the identification and self-identification of local communities. One of the criteria is that these are groups that have common history and culture. The second is the fact that their members are recognized as part of a collective or a group, and the group takes them on as part of it. The third criteria is territorial management, that they collectively manage the territory under different modalities depending on each country. In some cases, it might be as property, others as possession, or as use of these territories. And the fourth is self-government. We are proposing that these 4 criteria are recognized by the multilateral entities and bodies to identify, without a doubt, these local communities, and that they perhaps could participate in a consultation process of matters that interest them or that affect their territories, or that they might be supported through public policies, specifically for these sectors. In Mexico's case, half of the territory is being managed by collective entities called ejidos and communities. And some specialists consider that approximately 20% could be considered as indigenous and 80% could be considered as local communities. This is also the case in other countries. The number of local communities is very significant. Having pointed this out, I would like to say that from our point of view, even though as is frequently the case, COPs fall short. What I mean is that we always achieve less than what is expected. But I would like to point out that in the case of COP30, the government of Brazil, alongside other governments, had a huge challenge, which was maintaining the multilateral aspect in environmental aspects in the face of the big political and economical gap that the exit of the US from these spaces offers. So we also have to consider in these contexts that the multilateral bodies are now facing a challenge. So just the fact of maintaining themselves is an achievement. I would like to mention that the local community organizations in the face of COP30 had 4 strategic objectives. The first, to be able to establish ourselves as a global caucus of local communities or a global forum of local communities. And that depended more on us than on the agreements with governments. Second, to have an effect on the decisions of the parties or of the government in terms of the review of the mandate of the platform of local communities and indigenous peoples. Third, to visibilize the agenda of local communities. And fourth, begin dialogues with allies and possible allies, because for some colleagues, perhaps local communities, since it's not clear for many what exactly they are, might represent a concern or even a threat. The first objective, from our point of view, the main objective, is that we carried out the meeting for establishing the Global Forum of Local Communities and Climate Change with representatives of Latin America, Africa, and Asia. My colleague Bharati from Nepal will also be talking about this agenda. This objective of formally establishing this was achieved, and I believe that this is one of the most relevant ones. The second objective, in terms of having an effect on the decision of the parties, well, we were able to achieve a decision from the government for continuing the discussions about the representation of local communities, and there will be a workshop in Bonn in June within the framework of the SAPSA. And these are the intermediate meetings of the Convention on Climate Change and the path towards the next COP. This objective, even though it did not have as big a scope as we had wished, it allows us to continue with the agenda of local communities and its discussion. On the other hand, we had different events, press conferences, side events, and panels, and we were able to visibilize the local community agenda. And we were able to carry out several dialogues with different parties, including representatives of indigenous peoples, conveying a clear message of unity, also alongside our colleagues from Afro-descendant peoples. This message was that we have to recognize our differences in terms of the identity that we have, but we also have to recognize the common agenda that we have in terms of financing, rights, and also the common threats that we face. We have to see who is interested in this and who has benefited from the fact that indigenous people, local communities, and Afro-descendant peoples are separated. Generally, those that benefit from the lack of coordination and having the separation are those powers that would like to go into the territories and violate rights, or those who wish to implement projects that do not necessarily respond to the priorities of peoples and communities. I believe that I am a bit over time, but I would like to leave it at that for now, and I believe that Bharati will also talk a bit about the agenda that we have for our future. Thank you so much, Kyle and Andy.
Thank you, Gustavo, for your sharing. We appreciate you. And yeah, again, appreciate the speakers and our time commitment for the 7-minute slots. We're very appreciative of all the discipline that takes and are grateful. I'd like to call our next speaker, which is the Parliament member Bharati Pathak from Nepal. Bharati. Oh, Bharati, you're still on mute.
Thank you very much, Kyle and Andy, and my friends, Gustavo also in here, Solange and Rukka, and all friends. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, my brothers and sisters. I'm Bharati Pathak. I'm a former chairperson of the Federation of Community Forest Users Nepal and the executive advisor of the Women's Rights and Resource Network. Similarly, member of the Parliament member in Bagmati province. I want to thank all of you for being here today. I'm especially grateful for the opportunity to speak on today key issues of the local community. And Gustavo already mentioned here many issues for the local communities. Especially, I have participated in the COP30 Belém. So we were there together. And there was the continuously discussion about the local communities issues and the indigenous people issues also in there. There was the many side event and we participated for the different side event also there. Raise the voice for the local communities rights and the indigenous people rights also there, and the women's rights issues also we raised the voice in the COP30 in Belém. So we are continue struggle for the rights of the climate justice. We are and the community climate justice, natural resource management. While women's and the youth agendas are light globally and network at the national level, they still need to stronger consideration at the regional and the global level also. That's why we formed the Global Caucus, already mentioned to the Gustavo also in here. How can we bring to the local communities issues and national platform like UNFCCC as the unified front? We all agreed from the GFLCC Global Forum of Local Communities and Climate Change and work together. This is the global self-organized and independent politically space of the local community, which articulate common position across the region, Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Caribbean. Also, our strategy included collaborating with the UNFCCC Secretariat, Indigenous people, and the Afro-descendant groups also. Likewise, the adoption of the Belém Gender Action Plan COP30 for the significant multifaceted opportunity for world. It provides the global leverage, secure the enhanced gender responsive climate finance. The action plan encourages the funding system directly to vulnerable communities and group directly in the local community, indigenous group, and the women's group also, and such as indigenous women and lead women, and the adaptation project addressing the climate change impact on the livelihood. It also prioritizes the women and marginalized community in the climate decision making. So rural women are facing to the many challenges, and the no more access for the rural women in the climate finance. So we raised the voice for the different side event, and there was making to the gender action plan also. So we highlighted the some issues, especially cases for the Nepal also. We have more than 23,000 community forest users group. There is the 50% women are mandatory in community forest users group. Similarly, indigenous women also working the grassroots level. And now I'm working in the Women's Rights and Resource Network. There is the 4,500 women's group directly affiliated with us. So still, rural women are facing the many challenges, and the youth also facing the many challenges. We are from different sectors, so that strengthen and raise the voice of the local community. We should organize the regional conference, raise the climate change issues, ensure the climate justice, tenure rights, and local land governance. And likewise, we need to the collaboration with the various university, researcher center, collaboration communities, and different right-based agencies enhance the develop the local community for the future. Especially, we are facing many challenges, and Gustavo also mentioned in here, one is the important part for the 20 by 30. Still, we are making to the some position, and how we can recognize the local communities in the global platform UNFCCC, and similarly actively participate for the women's and the youth also in the global platform, because they are facing to the many challenges, but no more access for the participator to the different platform, and recognize the global platform also in the local community. So we discussed with that way in the COP30 Belém also. That was the good platform, but one is the problem for the no more access for the climate finance for the women and youth and local communities also. So we are together now, and we make to the GFLCC in the global networks and caucus, and we need to work together in indigenous people and local community, because we cannot go to the separately, and we need to raise the voice for the together, and after that we will success for the recognized for the local community and indigenous voice. Thank you very much giving this opportunity, and already say to the Gustavo also many points for the local community issues. If you have any queries, I'm here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bharati. So I appreciate everybody's thanks for the Parliament member, Bharati Pathak, for her sharing with us and for her leadership. And I'm going to go back into our original order. So our next speaker is going to be the Executive Director, Kimaren. But while Kimaren is just getting ready, I just wanted to say that in order to understand how to take action. When I first started doing international work, I learned very quickly that the websites and the books don't tell you what you need to know. You need to be involved and plugged in and know the people that are taking leadership to find out what you need to do. And our colleagues here, that's what they're sharing. That's exactly what they're sharing with all of us who are here. So I'd like to invite our next speaker, Kimaren Ole Riamet, Executive Director. Kimaren, please.
Good your time, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
You are.
Thank you. So that's my name, Kimaren Ole Riamet. I come from the pastoralist Maasai community based here in southern Kenya. And very pleased to be in this space with all of you. Thank you very much, Kyle and Dr. Andy and Solange and for giving us the opportunity to reflect with you our journey to COP30 and perhaps our reflection for the future. My colleagues, Rukka, had just spoken and touched on the outcomes, and also Gustavo and our sister who just spoke. I am not sure what level we are as an audience, whether we are starting to climb the tree from the leaves there at the tip. But I wanted to take a minute or so to say how Indigenous people found themselves here. So, of course, when UNFCCC happened, there was a recognition that humanity and the planet is threatened by our own activity, that climate change is a predominantly human-induced problem. Flawed development pathways have brought us to this problem. And Indigenous people started engaging with the UNFCCC like the rest of the stakeholders, not as stakeholders, but as right holders. And they had 5 key asks within the UNFCCC. Number one was Indigenous people's rights, that rights must be at the center of all discussions and outcomes and ultimate programs and actions under this framework. The second is their ways of knowing and doing. Indigenous knowledge systems need to be recognized, given space for expression, and should inform actions. The third is a voice, participation, including through free, prior, and informed consent, so that Indigenous people can express their visions and their insights on this problem. The third is around access to resources, climate finance, or fourth. And the other is around non-carbon dimensions of nature, rights for Mother Earth, that we cannot just talk about carbon as a property and abstract it from the natural context within which Indigenous people give it spiritual, sacred value, and all these others that are not necessarily carbon or market oriented. The other one is traditional governance and of Indigenous peoples. And basically, these 5 or so elements united the Indigenous people movement globally. We recognize that despite the context, the diverse context we find ourselves in, we recognize that these foundational elements, right, participation, voice, land rights, and access to resources are foundational and cross-cutting. And so fast forward to now the UNFCCC decisions, and to what extent have they reflected this? So Cancun, I think, in Mexico, 2010 was one of the first decisions that took most of these elements. And then Paris happened, the Paris Agreement. And most of these elements, however weakly expressed, found their way. You have human rights in the Paris Agreement, traditional knowledge in the Paris Agreement, indigenous people participation in the Paris Agreement. And what so happened, which was another COP decision that recognized knowledge and community level participation, monitoring dimensions of climate by indigenous people. And so from these decisions in Paris, the biggest question for indigenous people has remained, to what extent do these decisions get translated to national level policy, the national determined contributions, the national adaptation plans, the mitigation action plans, and the RED and all these programs finally that gets implemented on their lands. And so, and therefore, even as we went to Belém, this is a prism through which we are looking at all these negotiations. And we had, Belém was hyped as an indigenous COP. Indigenous COP, one, because the territory within which it was happening, it was in the Amazon, where we have a large population of indigenous peoples. But also indigenous because there was an initial push for a pledge 2.0 to enhance climate access to climate resources to indigenous people. So there was this talk of a 2.0 pledge, scaling up direct access of finance to indigenous people. And therefore, and then also the population, there were 3,500 indigenous people in Belém. And so there was also this feeling that their voice will be amplified, their presence would be felt, and their needs better heard, and therefore informing decisions. And because we don't have the time to really dissect much deeply what happened, on finance, we have already had the Tropical Forest Forever Fund that is mostly targeted at tropical forest landscapes. Of course, the question here is, how about the other landscape? Do they sequester carbon? Yes, they do. And why are they not funded? We are yet to know. And then there was also an interesting decision around a commitment to a roadmap to move away from fossil fuel, which 87 countries actually committed to this roadmap. Not a decision yet, but I think a step in the right direction. The Mutirao decision, which is this political position document, acknowledged land rights as central to addressing issues of climate change. The 1.8 billion has been articulated by Rukka. And if you look at the other decisions of the COP, the loss and damage acknowledge at least that indigenous people must be part of the active observer space for loss and damage fund. And there is a draft policy to this effect. The technology decisions acknowledge that indigenous people have technologies that need to be supported and others need to build their capacities on. The global goal on adaptation acknowledge in its annex on indicators. There is an annex on indicators on adaptation. One around disaggregating data on indigenous people, cultural heritage as an indicator, and indigenous knowledge capacities as an indicator. And essentially, when you look at these decisions, increasingly we are relatively okay with the text, but the challenge remains. When rights are recognized, when indigenous knowledge is acknowledged, when the voice of indigenous people is considered important, to what extent are these decisions on text affecting the reality in our national and community level spaces? So I think going forward, what we need to do is we need to see more research to demonstrate this indigenous knowledge contribution to climate change. And I know PACTIS and the RRI are working around this indigenous-led research to demonstrate this contribution. One of the things we did at ILEPA is we launched a global study that brought together 700 cases out of the 7 socio-cultural regions, demonstrating the contribution of indigenous people to climate change. We need to find ways for our national government to take this recognition into their national contribution arrangements, to their national adaptation plans, and their safeguard information system at a country level. So that, because ultimately, we were not interested in beautifying the language of the UN with indigenous friendly language. We are interested in securing rights and livelihoods on the ground. And I thank you, and sorry if I took forever.
Thank you, Executive Director Kimaren. We appreciate everything that you shared. And before I move on to our next speaker, which is the National Coordinator, Kátia Penha, I just wanted to say that to all of you in the audience, feel free to come and go as your schedule allows. We're definitely going to complete our first session, but just to know you're free to engage as you had originally planned for our events and activities this morning. But yeah, without anything further, I'd like to call our next speaker, which is Kátia Penha, a national coordinator. Kátia?
Olá, boa tarde.
Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure, it's a huge pleasure to be here with all of you. After a COP30 that was very intense with many challenges. So I want to first start by, congratulating all the organizations from Africa, Asia, Latin America, the organizations that are organizing this event today, RRI, for providing us with this moment to have this dialogue, to coordinate what our efforts, what we did in 2025, throughout 2025, to be able to participate in COP30 in the Amazon region. The Amazon region is also Afro-descendant, and many times it's invisible by its history, by its context, in our defense of biodiversity and the forests. So I want to thank each one of you. I'd like to greet everyone so that 2026 can really be an amazing year with achievements and with a lot of dialogue. So we are an organization, we are an organization here in Brazil that is linked to the Afro-Descendant Coalition of Latin America and the Caribbean. And our focus has always been to fight for racial and climate justice. And in COP30, we raised the voice of the peoples that historically protect the forests and life. So throughout 2025, we created several agendas and strategic points to really advocate in COP30. And this has been debated since COP16. I would like to greet, I don't know if we have colleagues here from other countries that are participating today, that are participating in this coalition through the coordination. And we try to systemize documents that we could bring to the discussion table so we could deliver this to the governments, to the UN, and to several secretariats of the UNFCCC, and also to coordinate these spaces that are not easy and that they have not been communicated with us, and they were never for us as Afro-descendant communities in Latin America and in Brazil. Even though this COP happened in Brazil, where most of the Brazilian population was able to be there in this context of the Amazon and Belém, yet we had many challenges to advocate for participation and to raise our voice. The first point is to be acknowledged as peoples with rights, and we want to be protagonists in these climate agendas. And this has been a very important point because without the acknowledgement of us as protagonists of climate action, There are no other actions that can be done in terms of global warming or to get more funding. So to finance whom and for what? So we brought these very important points. Firstly, to be acknowledged as a subject with rights, and then the second point was territorial rights. We cannot have any climate negotiation without the preservation of the territorial rights of this population that are in Latin America as a whole. The second, the third is the just funding, right? That can provide access to climate funds without any middlemen, that will provide visibility to the actions to the Afro-descendant communities in Latin America and the Caribbean, specifically here in Brazil. And also a climate and racial justice that shows that the climate crisis is not equal. So we need specific political specific policies for these populations that are in these territories. But we also had some success. Differently than what happened in the COP16 in Colombia and Cali, it was important to really bring this agenda of being acknowledged and to mention our acknowledgement as peoples, and this provided international visibility, and this even with all the concern, the restlessness of several governments that were not happy with our documents or our voices and our advocacy. But we need to dialogue with this population. They need to dialogue with us. So this international space was very important. Because many times we were in these important panels and important negotiation spaces and dialogue with the negotiators, both Brazilians and from other countries. So we have also the leadership of the Colombian government. Then they brought several strategies, and the Brazilian government was there in the balances, right? Because there are many things at stake when we talk about territories. So, and we talked about climate funding. What are the goals established so that we can live in a planet that is equal with sustainability and with these peoples living with dignity in each corner of our continent? So the formal commitments were very important. So both formal and informal, the inclusion of our agenda in the official documents. Even though we have not been recognized before, but we have seen in the official UNFCCC documents quotes from the Afro-descendant peoples from Latin America, and three important pillars for, gender equality and for women, so we can have this just transition. So this is one of the achievements that we were able to fight for. And we will continue to fight to get acknowledgement for many of these other points that we defend. The strategic alliances with several organizations, the construction of the network with the indigenous peoples. Here in Brazil, CONAC has a very important partnership with the indigenous peoples and with knowledge. So CONAC has been participating for about 5 years effectively in this space, and not only in the negotiation tables, but in partnership with indigenous peoples, with indigenous organizations, with local communities. We have been able to progress in these strategic alliances and where we want to be, which is in this space, which is the COP, right? The conferences of the parties, the strategic space, and and also the progress for climate funding. So an opening dialogue and to create mechanisms that allows for direct resources for the climate crisis. So in Brazil, we have a tropical forests fund, and we need to be in this space to dialogue. So the Brazilian government, after the COP, we have been monitoring this, and we have been able to make our voices and our documents and our desires to be included in this dialogue and to talk about funding and what are the mechanisms that will be created in fact, so that these communities and these populations can have access to this funding. So we hope, and it wasn't 100%, right, a COP as we had planned. So, for example, the results, the outcomes to reduce deforestation in Brazil, for this to happen, we need to really regularize our lands. And unfortunately, the Brazilian government and other organizations did not deliver what we expected, which is to define the territories. So they didn't sign these commitments. So this also, of course, this does not discourage us altogether. We need to come back so that we can in the future make sure that our actions are ensured. And we hope that in the next few years we can continue to fight. So this is an agenda that really deserves a lot of study, a lot of training, a lot of information, because this is an agenda that is not inclusive yet. It is a space that is not inclusive. The activities that will happen after the COP and in preparation for the next COP, it happens at a speed that is different than the timeline of the Afro-descendant communities, especially when we talk about funding. So we can really follow up on these agendas, so we can have our brothers and sisters really monitoring each point that has been discussed. And we also have the language, right? So language is very important. We in our territory, we have our own language. And so we need, this year, we really need to continue with this process, to continue to advocate and to be protagonists, because I believe this was very important in COP16 and COP30. It was very important to get this acknowledgement, at least that has been mentioned in some points, but we want more, of course. We intend to reach 2030, to reach COP31 or 32 with this acknowledgement. We want to be protagonists in these actions, these climate actions, and in the global agendas. So I would close. I don't know if my time is up or not, but I would like to conclude by saying that I would like to highlight this, that we are not only fighting for survival in our territory, we're fighting for justice and for a future, for climate justice and for the future. We need to ensure that the Afro-descendant peoples can be acknowledged as the guardians of life and the forest, with an active voice and real power in climate decisions. This is what we desire. This is what we continue to fight for, with several challenges, of course, that we will face, but we will continue to advocate in these spaces so that this can really be an inclusive space for everyone. So thank you very much. And I hope that I didn't go over my allocated time, and I'm here if you have any questions.
Great to hear everybody's appreciation of what Kátia shared. And yeah, again, we appreciate the speaker's consciousness of time. We're actually doing pretty good. We'll probably extend the first session by about 15 minutes, but we're doing good. There's so much important ideas and information and visions and just incredible things that are being shared. So, and again, for folks in the audience, feel free to engage as you please based on your schedules. You have that freedom. So I'd like to move to the part of our first session, which I was really thrilled about, which is our youth leaders. And so we have three fantastic colleagues that are here with us and will also be sharing about their work and leadership and experience at COP30. And so the first of the youth leaders that I'd like to speak is Kenia Parkiri. And then we're going to move on to Sharana Sherpa and Saba Rani Maharjan. So I'd like to call to speak Kenia Parkiri from the Indigenous Peoples Livelihood Enhancement Partners, Kenya. And I did see Kenia earlier on the Zoom. If for some reason we're not able to have her right now, we will move on to the next person, and just checking to see if Sharana is there. If so, if you could come on camera. Okay, great. Well, maybe we'll have your presentation next, Sharana, if that works. So I'd just like to introduce Sharana Serpa from the Center for Indigenous Peoples Research and Development, Nepal. Sharana?
Thank you, Professor Kyle, and Tashi Delek to everyone. I am Sharana Sherpa, Sherpa Indigenous Youth from Nepal, and I'm from the Center for Indigenous Peoples Research and Development. So straight going to the point. So for us, at the COP30, we had a really diverse participation of youth, women, as well as local government representative, which provided a very holistic participation. And at the COP30, our core fight was for ensuring rights-based climate action and to ensure that the COP30, which was labeled as the Indigenous Peoples COP, lives up to its name, and with the participation and leadership of Indigenous youths and women as well. So our main push was on Indigenous led research and education so that Indigenous voices, knowledge systems, ground realities are meaningfully reflected in climate research and policies, and ensuring that these knowledge systems are engaged ethically, respecting and promoting our knowledge systems, and ensuring that they are not misappropriated or misused when they are shared in the international platforms such as the UNFCCC. Another critical area for us was also on the intergenerational transfer of knowledge and leadership among Indigenous youths, and bringing Indigenous youth leadership and climate initiatives, and emphasizing these in the climate change forums such as the UNFCCC. Likewise, we also really advocated for enhancing the direct access of climate finance for Indigenous peoples, remaining grounded in rights-based approach to climate action and climate justice. So for these priorities, we actively collaborated with a wide range of actors: universities, Indigenous peoples organizations, multilateral institutions, youth-led groups, as well as government representatives, leading multiple side events on Indigenous-led research, education, and climate policy with the UNFCCC's Action for Climate Empowerment ACE framework, as well as on enhancing direct access of climate finance for Indigenous peoples with representatives from the GCF as well as the government, as well as on Indigenous youth leadership in climate action, especially focusing on transboundary issues of climate change. And likewise, our work also extended beyond COP 30 itself. For the COP30 at the LCIP meetings too, we collectively strategized on how Indigenous voices are meaningfully reflected in the UNFCCC. And one achievement from the LCIP meetings was the initiation of the ethical protocols for engagement of Indigenous peoples' knowledge systems in the international platforms to ensure that our knowledge systems are not misappropriated, misused, or extracted when they are shared in these international platforms. In addition to that, through side events, bilateral meetings, and informal and formal meetings and discussions, we were also able to foster a lot of collaborations as well as cross-regional collaborations, especially among youth-led organizations. And another key highlight was the International Indigenous Youths Forum on Climate Change, which had its General Assembly and with the representatives of all 7 sociocultural regions, including 3 from different sub-regions from Asia. Likewise, there was also an opportunity for us to strengthen the awareness and understanding of local government representatives. So moving forward, what is next? So as already shared by our elders and leaders here, there was quite significant progress at the COP30, but now the main focus remains on turning this global advocacy into local impact, bringing these learnings back to our communities, and ensuring the implementation of Indigenous-led research at the local level through Indigenous curricula. Resources to be allocated to ensure youth leadership in climate action, climate initiatives, as well as in leading these climate actions. In addition to that, with new climate finance mechanisms being introduced, we need to continue pushing for direct access to climate finance for indigenous peoples as right holders, continue strengthening collaborations between regions and institutions. And in the national context, mountain agenda remained a key priority for Nepal, and we are also really pushing to ensure that mountain agenda does not only speak about the mountains but also about the communities, about the youths that have been protecting these mountains from generations. And finally, strengthening the leadership of Indigenous Youth Forum on Climate Change and supporting more participation and leadership of Indigenous youths in climate research and climate decision-making platforms. So this is all from my side. Thank you, Tuchichi.
Thank you very much, Sharana, and fantastic to hear about all your leadership and your tremendous accomplishments in that space and all the courage that it takes. And yeah, we appreciate your organization, CIPRED, Center for Indigenous Peoples Research and Development. It's a member of the PAC partnership, the Pathways Alliance for Change and Transformation. So thank you again, Sharana. And I do see that our next colleague is here. So I'd like to move on to the next youth leader. That's Kátia Parkiri from the Indigenous Livelihoods Enhancement Partners. Kátia, please.
Hello and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here, and to really appreciate everybody for being here. First is to say that COP30 that happened at Belém was actually my first COP, but actually it was an eye-opener. It was quite intense, politically complex, but anyway, I found my way out. So, yeah. So, but I quickly learned that COP conferences are not just, COP is not just conferences, but they're really negotiations, arenas, power moves across formal negotiations, caucuses, side events, bilateral agreements between institutions, donors. And so really finding your way out should be really a priority. So for Indigenous youth, COP30 was not just about presence, it was about what we fought for, what we achieved, and actually what must happen next, and us actually monitoring what happened next. So Indigenous youth at the COP actually organizing themselves, through International Indigenous Youth Forum on Climate Change, strategically and collectively to ensure that COP30 commitments and every other COP are respected in practice and not just recorded on text. So personally, I represented ILEPA and also represented Kenya Indigenous Youth Network, a network of young Indigenous people. And of course, at the center of all this transformation stand Indigenous youth and asserting their voices, responsibility, and leadership. So where did Indigenous youth fight for at the COP? Indigenous youth actually fought for rights and not just recognition. Indigenous youth from all the 7 social cultural regions that are UN recognized actually delivered a collective political statement grounded in one fundamental truth, that climate justice is inseparable from decolonization and indigenous self-determination. So together we called for full and effective participation of Indigenous youth in all UNCCC processes, unwavering respect for free, prior informed consent in all climate action. We also called for protection of Indigenous knowledge system through the protection of the lands from which they all emerge from. We also fought for the recognition of non-economic and cultural loss and damages to the spiritual, social, cultural. So we fought for their recognition. And also we called for the safety and protection of Indigenous youth and land defenders that actually are being criminalized and are being attacked all over. Our message was very clear that no climate action without Indigenous people's rights and actually Indigenous youth voices. What we achieved at COP30 was actually that COP30 marked a shift. Not perfection, but of course, progress. So what we saw is indigenous unity proved actually very powerful through the daily indigenous people caucuses. Indigenous people negotiated with one voice on climate finance, loss and damage, adaptation, land rights, FPIC, and actually unity was very strategic and not just symbolic. COP30 signaled that a shift from debating why climate action is needed now and to how it shall be implemented. And that was actually mentioned by our elders who spoke before us about the global multilateral decision that affirm that indigenous people are not just stakeholders, but actually solution holders. And this includes the voice of the youth at the COM. So they mentioned about, and I think it's Mr. Kimaren mentioned about 3,500 indigenous people participated globally at the 30th of conference of party at COP at Belém, and the majority were the youth. But presence is growing, yes, but power must also follow. And also one of the most significant thing for us, as mentioned by Mr. Kimaren, is ILEPA being able to coordinate and launch an official global launch of the Global Study on Indigenous People Climate Contribution and Trends to in Access to Climate Finance, the guidance of the climate. So the event brought very many participants, over 100, and the majority were young people representing indigenous people from the 7th UN recognized sociocultural regions of the world. And this was a marking point for indigenous youth in climate action, research, and access to climate finance. The study created visibility, legitimacy for indigenous youth leadership, and also open pathways to climate finance for indigenous youth-led action. Also got an opportunity to speak at a side event that was organized by Impedo, Clarify, and RRI. And my reflection actually was at the role of indigenous-led data and research in unlocking climate finance and how to reframe pastoralism and to shift it from being seen as a problem to actually a solution. And actually, indigenous-led data research created a pathway for youth, to move from advocacy now to influence. And also, it means that evidence is power. And that when pastoralism knowledge systems are documented, validated, and led by indigenous-led researchers, youth gain the tools to engage funders, governments, and institutions. I also got an opportunity to deliver an African region press statement on behalf of the International Indigenous People Forum on Climate Change. And it was a defining leadership moment for me as an indigenous youth. It strengthened my confidence and deepened my sense of responsibility, not just to speak, but to speak for a region. The experience taught me that youth leadership at global spaces like COP30 is about carrying collective with integrity and also courage. Looking at roadmap towards 2030, the Indigenous Youth Network and all Indigenous youth are actually looking at implementation and accountability. We will be watching closely for whether FPIC is restricted in energy, mining, climate projects, whether climate finance become direct, accessible, and equitable, whether indigenous youth programs are also put in consideration, whether non-economic loss and damages are being addressed, and also whether indigenous youth participation is institutionalized within the UNCCC. So climate finance is a big barrier, and not being the governance system and implementation will actually fail. And 4 things that I learned from COP, that preparation is very key, youth voices matter, and actually evidence is also critical, and indigenous leadership, not just prices, is very essential. And lastly, that advocacy is continuous, strategic, and relational. And lastly, COP30 for me was not the end, it was actually a starting point, and the indigenous youth voices are ready to lead the next chapter toward 2030 vision. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Kania. And yeah, just for the first climate conference of parties that you've been to, you really stepped in and were brilliant and did amazing work there. And that takes a lot of drive and energy and just a lot of patience and stability. So yeah, we appreciate your leadership and your sharing. And I see our next colleague from the Youth Leaders is here. So I'd like to call Sabi Rana Maharjan from the Global Youth Network to share with us. Please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kyle and Andy, for having me here today. I'm super grateful. So, Jojolapa and warm greetings to everyone. My name is Sabah Rani Moharjan, and I belong from the Newa Indigenous community from Nepal. However, working as Asia Youth Convener at RRI, I represented the collective youth voice as IPLC and ADB and allied groups at COP30. So, I'd like to begin by saying that, as much as I believe that COP30 was chaotic, like most of the panelists have already mentioned, the so-called People's COP had a very militarized parameter, around the summit. I also wanted to highlight that. And it actually mirrored the same colonial system, oppressive structure that indigenous and, marginalized community have resisted for generations. So again, despite everything, focusing on the good part as a youth representative, I would say COP30 was very essential because, youth leaders from different regions and different constituencies, we came together with our global agenda, with our own voices, with our own leadership, and that was very important. So we stepped forward as a united voice. And RRI actually supported youth from IPLC and ADB communities, and together we fought for climate justice that was rooted in rights, our lived realities, and also, leadership as well. So number one is definitely the recognition of and protection of land rights of IPLC and ADVs, climate justice, not just climate action, and also emphasizing that we need to focus on the historical responsibility, the equity, and the community-led solutions are so much important to highlight. So we are also centering, indigenous knowledge, that it is essential as we talk about climate responses, and also meaningful participation of youth, not just tokenistic participation, but a very meaningful participation in the governance spaces. And also another is direct financing. I mean, financing youth-led initiative, ensuring that resources are reaching the grassroots youth movements as well, because as we know that youth movements are very much unfunded in various reasons, especially when we talk about Asia as well. So talking about what we achieved at COP30 is RRI had its first ever youth side event at COP30, and 100 plus people participated there. That included not only youth but elders, from different regions and constituencies. So the outcome was we launched three major youth related documents, initiatives. The first one is the RRI Global Youth Roadmap. The second is the Youth Climate Justice Statement. And the third one is the RRI Global Youth Network. So just to give a little bit of context here, all of these outcomes are the part of the Global Youth Forum that was convened by RRI last year in July in 2025, where we brought together 52 young leaders from IP, LC, and ADBs. And, all of them came together through consensus. They developed their priorities areas that will be focusing on next year till 2030 and beyond. So if we look at the climate justice statement, which was launched, it was a bold statement that came together from the different constituency of youth. They voluntarily came together and drafted their collective demands and call to action, and it was presented at COP30 as well. And most importantly, I wanted to highlight the Global Youth Network. So it is a space for cross-learning, co-leadership, joint mobilization, and collectively defending our rights, and also shaping the global policy together. So the scoping study analysis was also done for this Global Youth Network by RRI. And the central finding there was there is no such global youth platform that meaningfully and intentionally, brings together the indigenous, local communities, Afro-descendant and allied youth groups together. So this is truly going to be one of the, one of its kind that intentionally is trying to bring all of this constituency in a same place. Actually, it emerged from a truth that we kept hearing from youth leaders in different regions, that we cannot fight isolated. We must rise together. So the outcome, the Global Youth Network is formed on this belief, actually, and this inclusive model is what we are thriving for as well, in 2030 as well. So therefore, just to summarize what we achieved at COP30 is that we moved collective youth voices into global decision making space. And because we are we barely get chances to be in these global arenas, it's a big deal for us youth to be in such global negotiation tables as well. And we transformed local and national demands into global agenda, and we connected climate actions with right and governance, and also demonstrated that we youth are collectively coming at you at the global level. So in short, COP30 became a movement where youth moved from consultation to collective presence. So just quickly highlighting our way forward and roadmap to 2030 is we envision it in three phases. The first one is regionalizing regionalization of the global youth roadmap. We'll be bringing these 5 priorities that youth have come up to by consensus in Asia, Africa, Latin America. We'll be holding dialogue with these youth leaders, and we are going to see how can we adopt these global priorities to their local realities. We'll be establishing regional youth advisory groups, and then we'll be convening regional dialogues with them, to build that alliance and cross movement solidarity with different constituencies in different regions. And finally, the long-term development of the global youth network, so that we can, as youth, we can mobilize together, defend collective rights, influence global policy. So these youth to youth allyship is not symbolic for RRI, rather it is very strategic, so that we are trying to create this long-term foundation, so that we can have this long-term leadership and shared economic political power among different constituency of youth. So hence, in the coming years, we are thriving to build climate justice from the ground up, very bottom to up approach, and turn participation into very much of collective power and long-term global youth network to create a sustained climate justice capacity, and finally to build a much more stronger youth participation in COP31 and beyond. So that is what we are targeting for 2030 actually. So that's from my side. Thank you so much. Back to you guys.
Thank you very much for those excellent remarks, Saba. And yeah, just appreciate all of that work and leadership on your part to put policies and roadmaps and regarding youth in writing that can be shared and used for movement building. Our original plan was we were going to have one more colleague to close out our opening session before our intermission. So I did want to check in to see if Juan Carlos is here and available to close out our session. So I'd like to invite Juan Carlos Jintiach Arcos, who is the Executive Secretary of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities, to speak to us and to close our opening session. Juan Carlos.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and for the invitation. First of all, I would like to thank you all for the invitation. Andy, Kyle, and I would like to thank all of you for the opportunity for a few words after all the wonderful speakers who spoke before me about the social movements, youth leaders. My name is Juan Jintiach from the Shuar Peoples. I'm currently the Executive Secretary of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities, GATC. GATC, the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities. Well, I would like to start by saying, to follow along the language and the work and the vision transmitted by the leaders, something key is the fundamental principles. This great coalition of indigenous and originary peoples from tropical forests that have a long road that has been covered. Each one of them has their territory and their living peoples that are presented in governance. Governance is a fundamental principle. It's not that indigenous people are not properly set up. It's not that indigenous peoples do not have an agenda. We have plans, life plans, we have agendas in our ecosystems. And the Global Alliance brings together this very great vision that the leaders had within the framework of unity to work on international agendas, taking the demands of the territory in which we live, ecosystems in which we live, pristine places that we are safeguarding. The Global Alliance of Tropical Forests, to this day, manages, controls, monitors almost 1 billion hectares. And we are partners, strategic allies, and we have something to say in this sense. And I believe that COP30, for me and for many leaders, was a place of visibilization, and it allows us to portray a human concept, a concept of people, a concept that is visible, of that social movement, that movement that seeks to visibilize the demands of the leaders and all those who have already mentioned it. It is important to express that COP30 is another COP, of course, with sweet and sour moments, with victories and norms and reference points. And I believe that it's important to express, after having heard the leaders, that we should not say that these commitments will not be abided by. Instead, we have to make sure we follow up and get involved so that those promises or those documents or those work lines can actually be implemented and can actually go into the territories. The Global Alliance of Territorial Forests, together with its legitimate leaders and this great coalition, have proudly participated with our leaders and brothers in an Amazon COP, in a Latin American COP, in a COP at a very sensitive spot, which is the Amazon basin and the tropical forests, visibilizing that social commitment with the commitment and the commitments made by governments. After a declaration or a Paris Agreement, it's been 10 years. And what has happened? What has been managed? And what is awaiting us from now until 2030? I would like to connect all this by saying that COP30 for us, the movements of tropical forests, territorial organizations, organizations that have their own agendas, have a context that involves solidarity. This is a dynamic managed by the Global Alliance. Unity, not just as indigenous peoples, permanent dialogue, permanent respect, articulation with all these social organizations, organizations of indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant peoples, and local communities as well. That framework reflects how we can move forward in a dynamic such as the international context involving climate change. And having said this, I believe it is important to express that all these demands, alongside all the agreements made by governments, we have to remember the principle of generational change. The indigenous movement has walked a long path. There has been a lot of work in the international system, and you have all expressed it very well. We need to remember leaders and the agreements and commitments that have been made for us, the peoples in the Amazon and the tropical forests, in unity and solidarity. And we invite everyone to be committed to this implementation and action. And for this, the Global Alliance, together with each organization with their own governance and agendas, will give follow-up and will perform follow-up to all the 24 countries that are overlapping in different platforms. Of course, it is clear that there are a lot of interests at stake. There is no doubt. There's a lot of geopolitical issues going on as well, but the actors in the territory, such as ourselves, that have something to contribute and to say with our wisdom, our plans, and our proposals, are ready to contribute. And this calls upon the request to give fair and balanced follow-up to the commitments for an agenda that needs to be carried out. There is a job to do, and the Global Alliance, together with its governance and its leaders, is committed. Myself, as Executive Secretary, will make sure to monitor that this actually becomes a reality. There are strong commitments that have not been made visible to human beings, to indigenous peoples, and to those who live out in the territories, to those peoples that have not been contacted, those originary and living peoples that perhaps have not had all these opportunities, but there is a point of no return. And of course, you all know this. The data exists. But we will continue contributing through our ancestral wisdom, our proposals, and will contribute to these real commitments so that this can be executed. From the Global Alliance, it will always be a privilege to maintain an open dialogue and a consensus with territorial organizations and with all indigenous people, local communities, and Afro-descendant peoples who are looking for a common benefit from now forward. So what we have to do is we need to have mutual respect for the rights of indigenous peoples, their territories, consultation, self-determination, and we as living peoples are ready to contribute, like I said. Finally, COP30 for us, and that's my own personal opinion, was a COP that really brings us together and visibilizes us as human beings. That concept of solidarity, the concept of the fact that we are at the center to be able to visualize how we can contribute from hunger, poverty, and how we can mitigate all this. We assess all this, adaptation, resilience, and I believe that there are many goals so that the next generations can really continue down this path. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for closing us, Executive Secretary Juan Carlos. We appreciate your remarks and your words. And what an amazing first session for us this morning. And we appreciate everybody in the audience. There's a Zoom audience, there's a live audience, and everybody's bringing fantastic energy. As you've heard, folks were talking about exactly what all of us need to know to act in that solidarity and in that coalition. And to that end, we will obviously have a recording that we want to distribute widely. We had a registration email list of over 500 people for this event who are interested, and then our other distribution networks are much larger than that. And so we look forward to spreading these key points, these instructions widely with the support of you all, especially all the tremendous detail that people brought. And so what we're going to do now is take a 15-minute intermission. And we're going to come back in a remaining time with the speakers who are able to stay longer. We'll have a question and answer exchange, including both you all in the live audience, but also colleagues on Zoom. They've already been sending in their questions. And if you're on Zoom and you can hear me out there, it would be best for us if you're able to pose your question during the intermission. And then we can look at all the questions that are coming in. There's already quite a few, and we won't be able to pose nearly all the questions that are being sent to us. But please do, if you have a chance, pose it in during the intermission. But anyways, let's have a round of applause for all of the speakers and all of the contributions. That's tremendous. And let's go ahead and take a 15-minute intermission. And shoot, if you see somebody here you don't know, say hello to them. They're probably interested in the same things you are.